I never thought I would be the guy who would find himself in the middle of a relationship disaster. But here I am, a few months after discovering that my wife, Sarah, was cheating on me. It's a wild ride, and it started with the smallest signs that slowly turned into a full-blown revelation. Our marriage had always seemed solid. We were together for 8 years, and I thought we understood each other like no one else. Sarah had this vibrant personality. She was the life of every party, always in demand. She had friends everywhere and was always busy. At first, I admired her social skills, her ability to connect with people. But looking back, I see how her busy social life started to create a tiny crack in our relationship. Things gradually began to change. The once open communication faded into casual conversations about work and the usual daily grind. She started coming home later than usual, always with some excuse about work-related events or hanging out with friends. I tried to be supportive, encouraged her to enjoy life, but deep down, something didn't sit right with me. It felt like she was slipping away, and I felt helpless. Then there were the little things, the way she would get defensive when I asked about her day, the sudden need for privacy with her phone, and the frequent late-night texts she would receive. I told myself I was overthinking it. After all, I loved her, and love makes you blind sometimes. Everything came crashing down one evening when I returned home unexpectedly early from work. I walked into our apartment, and it was eerily quiet. I noticed right away that Sarah wasn't in the living room where I expected her to be. I checked the bedroom, and my heart stopped. There on our bed was her phone, buzzing like crazy with notifications. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. What I saw shattered my world. Text messages, pictures, evidence of her affair with a guy named Mark, someone I had heard her mention a few times but never thought much of. Reading those messages felt like each word was a dagger to my heart. The way she spoke to him, the intimacy they shared, it all made me sick. The betrayal was so profound I could hardly breathe. I dropped the phone like it was on fire and ran to the bathroom, where I spent the next few minutes hyperventilating, trying to wrap my head around what I had just read. When Sarah came home, I barely recognized her. She breezed in, the smile on her face quickly fading when she saw my expression. I didn't need to say anything. The look of horror began to creep into her eyes. I confronted her right then and there. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. Her reaction was predictable, filled with shock and denial. "What are you talking about?" she exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. I showed her the messages, her face draining of color as she read them. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction in witnessing her horror, but it was fleeting. I was drowning in my emotions, a mix of rage and heartbreak. She tried to explain, spinning a web of lies that were as flimsy as they were implausible. "It's not what you think. He's just a friend, nothing happened," she claimed, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. I could see the panic rising in her and how her composed exterior was crumbling. But I wasn't buying it. The evidence was right there, and it felt like she was just digging herself deeper with every word. In that moment, my heart was broken, but my mind was racing, contemplating the future. How could I trust her again? What did this mean for us? I was lost in a haze of betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman I loved with the one who was capable of such deceit. I had a choice to make, and it wouldn't be easy. But for now, the confrontation had set the stage for the chaos that was about to unfold in our relationship. The following days after the confrontation felt surreal. I was living in a fog, each moment heavy with disbelief and numbness. Sarah, once my partner, had now become someone I barely recognized. The woman who promised to be by my side through thick and thin had shattered that promise without a second thought. I was spiraling, and I knew I needed to make sense of everything, even if it hurt. After that fateful night, Sarah tried to act as if nothing had happened. She would come home, plaster a smile on her face, and attempt to engage me as if we were still a couple living in bliss, but I couldn't play along. Every time she looked at me, all I could see was the betrayal in her eyes, the way she twisted her stories to fit her narrative. I was angry, hurt, and confused, and I could tell she was feeling the pressure. It was during one of those awkward dinner conversations that she dropped the bombshell. "I think we need to work on our communication," she said casually, as if that would fix everything. I couldn't believe my ears. Did she really think that would fly? I felt my blood boil. You mean you need to work on your fidelity, Sarah? I snapped, throwing my fork down. Let's be honest here, communication isn't our problem. Her expression faltered. I'm trying to reach out to you, she replied defiantly, but her words fell flat. What was there to reach? I felt a wall between us that could not be breached, one built by her betrayal. She had crossed a line that was not easily erased. As days turned to weeks, I began to formulate a plan. It wasn't just about confronting her or demanding answers anymore. It was about regaining control over my life. I knew I had to do something drastic to make her understand the gravity of her actions. I wanted to show her that I wasn't just going to sit there and accept her lies. I started to gather evidence. I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. I became a detective in my own life, tracking her movements, watching her interactions. I followed her on some of her outings, using every opportunity to confirm my fears. I watched her laugh with Mark at a cafe, her face glowing with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in a long time. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Each smile she shared with him was a reminder of what I had lost. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that struck me. It was the emotional toll it took. I spent sleepless nights replaying memories in my head, drowning in thoughts of what we had, what I thought we had. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, a shadow of the man I used to be. The intimacy we once shared felt like a distant memory overshadowed by her infidelity. Then one night after a particularly painful day, I received a text message from Sarah. "Can we talk? I miss you." I stared at my phone, my heart racing. Did she really think that everything could go back to normal just like that? I decided I wouldn't respond immediately. Instead, I'd play her game. The next day I texted her back, "Sure, let's meet at our spot." Our spot was a little cafe on the corner where we had shared countless laughs and dreams. I arrived early, my heart pounding as I prepared myself for what was to come. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her, but I needed to hear what she had to say. When she walked in, her eyes lit up for a moment before they clouded with uncertainty. "Hey," she said, sitting down across from me. The tension was palpable, and I could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging between us. "I've been thinking." She started, but I cut her off. "Thinking about what, Sarah? About how to maintain your double life? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've done a great job of that." My tone was sharp, but I didn't care. I needed her to know that I wouldn't be a fool anymore. She flinched, her eyes darting away. "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen." "Not supposed to happen," I exclaimed. "You chose to do this. You made your choice." The conversation turned into a back and forth, filled with her excuses and my disbelief. Each excuse she offered felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was her blatant disregard for our relationship as she tried to weave her way back into my good graces. I was furious, but there was also a part of me that felt pity. Pity for what we once had and what she had chosen to throw away. But in that moment, I knew I had to stand my ground. I was done with her lies. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting, but this confrontation helped me solidify my decision. I would not allow her to manipulate me into a corner of forgiveness without consequences. This was about more than just revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and reestablishing my self-worth. The next phase of my plan was waiting, and it would be a reckoning. After that tense meeting at the cafe, I felt a mixture of emotions swirling within me. I was angry, betrayed, and yet there was a tiny flicker of hope that perhaps this confrontation would lead to something meaningful. But I quickly squashed that flicker. Deep down, I knew I was standing at a crossroads, and I had to make a decision that would shape the future of my life. The following days were filled with a tumult of emotions as I continued to gather information about Sarah's affair with Mark. I turned into a shadow, lurking in the background of my own life. I followed her movements, documenting every interaction I could. It felt like a desperate game, but it was my way of reclaiming control over a situation that had spiraled out of my hands. One afternoon, while I was staking out a local bar where I suspected she and Mark had been meeting, I saw them. They were sitting at a small table in the corner, their body language relaxed and intimate. My stomach turned as I watched them share soft Laughter, the kind of laughter that used to echo between Sarah and me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me and had to step outside to regain my composure. I didn't want to be the scorned husband, but at that moment, I felt like a wounded animal, ready to strike back against the world that had betrayed me. I knew that confronting Sarah again would not be enough. I needed her to feel the pain I was feeling. I had to devise a plan that would work as both a wake-up call and a form of revenge. That evening I returned home, a storm brewing inside me. I had made up my mind. I would confront her one last time, but this time it would be different. I would lay everything out on the table, the evidence I had gathered and the emotional wreckage she had caused. But I wouldn't just confront her. I would make her see how her choices affected me, our lives, and everything we built together. I spent the night preparing for the confrontation. I collected her messages, printed pictures I had taken of her and Mark, and even noted down the timeline of her lies. I wanted her to understand the extent of her betrayal. I was no longer just a hurt husband. I was a man reclaiming his power. When Sarah came home the next day, I was ready. She walked in, the usual excitement in her demeanor quickly replaced with an air of tension as she sensed something was off. I arranged the living room like a courtroom, the evidence laid out before me, ready for her to face the music. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She glanced around, noticing the papers and photos on the table, and her face paled. "What is all this?" "Evidence," I replied coldly. "Evidence of your infidelity and the lies that have poisoned our marriage." I started to lay everything out, each text message, each photo, and each lie she had told me over the past few months. With each revelation, I could see the shock and shame wash over her face. I felt a dark satisfaction in being the one to expose her, to hold her accountable for the choices she had made. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered, her voice shaky. "It was just a fling. I was confused." "Confused?" I retorted. "You think that's an excuse? You threw away our life together for what? A cheap thrill?" Her defensiveness crumbled as I laid bare the reality of the situation, and I watched as the tears began to flow down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. I stood firm, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "You don't get to say you're sorry after everything you've done. You don't get to rewrite this narrative. You made your bed and now you have to lie in it." I was relentless, striking at the heart of her excuses. I made it clear that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice she had made, and it had consequences. Her sobs filled the room, but I remained resolute. I needed her to understand the depth of my pain and the reality of what she had destroyed. As she tried to reach out to me for comfort, I stepped back, refusing to let her proximity sway my resolve. "No, Sarah. This is not how it works anymore. I can't trust you, and I won't pretend that I can. You've broken something that cannot be easily mended." The confrontation left me emotionally drained. I had fought back, set my boundaries, and stood my ground. But beneath the anger was an overwhelming sadness, a loss of the life I thought I had, the love I thought we shared, and the future we had envisioned together. I knew I needed to decide how to move forward from this moment. The emotional impact of the confrontation surged within me, but I couldn't dwell on it. I had to focus on what came next. Would I fight for our marriage, or would I walk away? The decision loomed over me like a dark cloud, but I felt more empowered to consider my options than I had in weeks. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer just a victim of her betrayal. I was a man who deserved better. The confrontation had been intense, and as the dust settled, I was left with a whirlwind of emotions. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been a happy home, now filled with the ghosts of betrayal. I felt exhausted, but there was an unfamiliar sense of clarity amidst the chaos. The anger had begun to subside, replaced by a deep sadness and the looming reality of what lay ahead. In the days that followed, Sarah and I existed in a tense standoff. She tried to reach out, to talk, to apologize, but each time I felt my resolve hardening. I had opened my heart to her, and she had shattered it so carelessly. I couldn't just sweep it under the rug and pretend everything would be fine. I needed time to think, to process what had happened, and to determine my next steps. The first few nights were particularly tough. The silence in our apartment was deafening. I would lie awake, replaying memories of happier times, of laughter and love that now felt like they belonged to a different life. I was torn between the love I had for Sarah and the betrayal that had left a bitter taste in my mouth. Was it possible to rebuild what had been broken? Could trust be restored? I began to seek advice from friends. I could no longer keep this to myself. I needed perspectives from outside my emotional turmoil. I confided in my close friend Mike, who had been my sounding board through various life challenges. When I told him what happened, he listened carefully, his face a mix of sympathy and disbelief. "Man, I can't believe she did that to you," he said, shaking his head. "You deserve better. You really have to think hard about what you want now." His words resonated with me. I had spent so many months trying to be understanding, trying to support Sarah with her busy life, but what had that brought me? Betrayal. Disappointment. "I just don't know if I can ever trust her again," I admitted. "I don't think I can go back to how things were." Mike nodded. "Trust takes time to build, but it can shatter in an instant. You need to decide if you think she's worth that effort. Think about what you truly want." That night, I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, contemplating my options. I realized that I was at a critical juncture in my life. I could either fight for my marriage or walk away from the pain. But what would fighting for it even look like? As the days turned into weeks, I started to see how our relationship had been plagued by cracks long before her affair. The communication breakdowns, the emotional distance, and the lack of intimacy were all symptoms of a deeper issue. There had been signs, and I had ignored them, too wrapped up in my own life and work. Deciding that I needed more than just emotional support from friends, I sought counseling. I wanted to understand my feelings better and explore whether there could be a path forward for us. I attended sessions, not just to discuss Sarah's betrayal, but to dig deeper into my own emotions, my expectations, and what I wanted from a relationship. As my therapist guided me, I began to uncover layers of resentment and hurt that had built up over the years. I had been so focused on being a good husband that I had neglected my own needs. I needed to learn how to prioritize my happiness and self-worth, regardless of what happened with Sarah. After a few sessions, I felt stronger. I started to work on my boundaries and what I needed to feel secure again. I wrote down everything I wanted from our relationship moving forward, including honesty, transparency, and a commitment to working together. If Sarah wanted to reconcile, she would have to show me she was serious about making changes. When I finally sat down with her again, I was calm but resolute. "If we're going to make this work, it's going to take a lot more than just words," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "You need to understand what you did and show me that you're willing to change." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know I've messed up. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I love you and I want to fix this." While her words struck a chord in me, they weren't enough. Love wasn't going to erase the hurt I felt or the trust that had been shattered. Love is important, but actions speak louder than words. "I need to see you committed to rebuilding our relationship," I replied firmly. We agreed to go to couples therapy together. I wanted her to understand the impact of her betrayal, to see the pain she had caused, and to work on our communication. If we were going to move forward, it had to be as a team, united in the goal of rebuilding our lives together. Slowly but surely, we began to navigate the rocky terrain of our relationship. There were tough conversations where I had to dig deep into my feelings, times when I felt vulnerable and exposed. But Sarah also opened up, revealing her fears and insecurities that contributed to her choices. It was messy and painful, but each session brought us closer to understanding each other. As we started to tackle the issues that led to the affair, I felt a flicker of hope. We were learning to communicate better, to share our feelings honestly, and to support one another. It wasn't easy, and I was still haunted by doubts, but I was willing to give it a chance. However, I knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, I felt empowered. I had taken control of my life back, and regardless of the outcome, I was committed to ensuring I was a happier, healthier person, whether with Sarah or on my own. I had begun the slow process of healing, and while the journey would be long, I was determined to see it through. As the weeks rolled into months, the The journey of rebuilding my relationship with Sarah continued to be an emotional roller coaster. Couples therapy had become a cornerstone of our efforts to navigate this tumultuous path. There were moments of vulnerability and connection that left me feeling hopeful, and then there were days when old wounds would rear their ugly heads, reminding me of the betrayal that had shattered our world. Each session was a mix of breakthroughs and setbacks. One day, we would dive deep into a difficult conversation about trust, and I would feel a glimmer of hope as Sarah laid bare her fears and insecurities. She talked about the pressures she felt in her career, the need for validation, and how those feelings had led her to make choices that hurt both of us. It was raw and painful to hear, but I appreciated her honesty. Then there were days when I found myself spiraling back into anger and sadness. I would catch a whiff of her perfume and be transported back to the moment I discovered her betrayal. My heart would race, and I would feel that familiar mix of disgust and heartbreak wash over me. Those moments were reminders that healing wasn't linear, it was messy, and each day presented a new challenge. I began to focus on self-care as a way to counterbalance the emotional toll of our reconciliation process. I started running again, something I had loved before our marriage. It became my escape, a time to clear my head and process my thoughts. I joined a local running group, where I met new people and found a sense of camaraderie that felt refreshing. I rediscovered my passion for photography, taking long walks with my camera, capturing the beauty of the world around me. It was liberating and empowering, reminding me that I was more than just a husband navigating infidelity. During one of our therapy sessions, I decided to bring up my running and photography to Sarah. I explained how much I enjoyed these activities and how they helped me cope with the stress of our situation. She listened attentively, her expression softening as she recognized how important they were to me. "I want to support you in that," she said, her voice earnest. "I want to encourage you to pursue your passions. It's easy to forget how to care for ourselves in all of this." Hearing her say that felt like a breakthrough. It was a sign that she was beginning to understand that we both needed to prioritize our individual happiness, not just our relationship. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, knowing that she was willing to acknowledge my needs and not just focus on her own. But as we made strides forward, the specter of her affair still loomed over us, and the unease would often creep back in. I found myself questioning her every move, who she was texting, where she was going, and if she was being truthful. I hated that I felt this way, but the scars were still fresh. One evening, while we were out for dinner at a restaurant we used to frequent, I noticed her phone buzz on the table. I instinctively glanced at the screen and saw a text from Mark. My heart dropped, and my stomach twisted in knots. It was an innocent message, but in that moment, it felt like a betrayal all over again. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Is everything okay?" I asked, forcing myself to maintain a calm tone. She looked at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "It's just Mark. He wanted to know if I was free to catch up." The tension in my chest tightened. "Why is he still texting you? I thought we agreed that you would cut ties with him." Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic rising within her. "I didn't want to hurt your feelings. We're just friends, and he's been supportive to me during this transition." I couldn't help but feel the anger bubbling up within me. "Supportive? Is that what we're calling it? You had an affair with him, Sarah. Do you honestly believe that keeping him around is a good idea?" The fight that followed was intense, filled with hurtful words and raw emotions. It was one of those moments where we both felt the weight of our past decisions crash into our present reality. As the argument escalated, I could hear the hurt in her voice, the desperation to prove that she was committed to our relationship. But every time she mentioned Mark, it felt like she was opening old wounds that had not yet healed. In the aftermath of that argument, I was left feeling more confused than ever. I needed to be clear about my boundaries, but I also didn't want to push her away. I was torn between my desire to protect myself and my hope for a future together. That night, I took some time to think. I wanted to express my feelings without letting anger dictate my words. I decided to write Sarah a letter. I needed to articulate my pain, my fears, and my hopes for our relationship. I wanted her to understand that while I was committed to rebuilding, I needed her to take responsibility for her actions fully. When I presented the letter to her the next evening, I watched as she read it, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't realize how much I had hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I need you to understand that trust takes time to rebuild," I replied softly. "We can work on this, but I need to feel secure in our commitment." We talked late into the night, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of connection rekindling. It was fragile, but it was there. We were both learning to navigate our new reality, to communicate more effectively, and to allow space for vulnerability and healing. As we continued to work through our issues, I began to see glimmers of the woman I had fallen in love with. The laughter started to return, small moments of joy blossomed amidst the pain, and I realized that while our journey had been tumultuous, there was potential for growth on the horizon. But I also knew that the road ahead would still be rocky. The scars of betrayal would take time to heal, and I would need to remain vigilant for both our sakes. I was prepared to continue fighting for our marriage, but I was also aware that I had to protect myself. Whatever the outcome, I was learning that healing comes from understanding, forgiveness, and a deep commitment to change, both for myself and for Sarah. As the months passed, Sarah and I continued to navigate our rocky path toward reconciliation. Each day was a blend of progress and setbacks, and I found myself oscillating between hope and doubt. The journey of healing is not linear. It is filled with ups and downs, twists and turns that can leave you feeling lost at times. We committed to attending couples therapy regularly, and each session became a crucial space for us to express our feelings, address our needs, and work through our challenges. We learned to communicate better, to listen to each other without the urge to respond immediately. I discovered that allowing Sarah to voice her thoughts and fears without judgment created a safe space for her to be vulnerable. And in turn, I began to share my pain and insecurities more openly. One evening, while sitting on the couch together, I looked at Sarah and felt a warmth spreading in my chest. "Remember when we used to go on those spontaneous weekend trips?" I asked, a hint of nostalgia in my voice. She smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Yeah, those were some of the best times. I miss that spontaneity." It struck me then that we were beginning to reconnect, not just as a couple trying to rebuild trust, but as two individuals who had shared a life filled with laughter and adventure. That night, I suggested we plan a weekend getaway, just the two of us. It was a leap of faith, but I felt a growing confidence that we were on the right track. We chose a cozy cabin in the mountains, a place where we could escape the noise of our daily lives and focus on each other. The drive was filled with laughter and music, an atmosphere reminiscent of the early days of our relationship. As we settled into the cabin, I could feel the weight of our struggles lifting, if only for a moment. That weekend was transformative. We hiked through the woods, cooked together, and sat by the fireplace, sharing stories and memories. It was as if we were rediscovering the essence of who we were as a couple. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that we were both committed to making this work. But just as I began to feel secure, doubts crept in too. I found myself questioning whether I was truly ready to forgive completely, or if I was merely putting a band-aid over a wound that had yet to fully heal. The ghost of her betrayal lingered, reminding me of past pain. I realized that while we were moving forward, I still needed to address those lingering feelings. During our last therapy session, I brought up my concerns. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice cracking. "We've made progress, but I still feel this lingering fear that I'm going to get hurt again." Sarah reached for my hand, her eyes filled with understanding. "I'm scared too. I know I messed up, and I'm terrified of losing you again. I want to prove to you that I'm committed to changing." That moment of honesty brought us closer together. I recognized that both of us were navigating this journey of healing with vulnerability. It wasn't just my pain, it was hers too, and we were learning to shoulder it together. I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me, and I realized that healing was a shared responsibility. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see Sarah working hard on herself. She started attending her own therapy sessions, addressing her issues with self-worth and the reasons behind her affair. I admired her courage and dedication to personal growth, which, in turn, motivated me to continue my journey of self-discovery as well. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I know I've hurt you and it's going to take time for you to fully trust me again, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make this right." I took a deep breath, my heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and love. "I believe you, Sarah. It's going to take time, but I'm willing to work on this together. I want us to come out of this stronger, even if it means facing the pain along the way." From that moment on, I felt a shift within me. While I still carried the scars of betrayal, I realized that I had the power to define my relationship moving forward. Trust would take time to rebuild, and I was willing to be patient, provided we both committed to the journey. We set new goals for our relationship, focusing on transparency, accountability, and mutual support. We made a pact to keep our lines of communication open, to share our feelings honestly, and to check in with each other regularly. It was a renewed commitment to not just our marriage but to ourselves as individuals. As the seasons changed, so did our relationship. What was once a fractured bond began to heal. We celebrated small victories, an evening spent laughing, a shared meal without tension, a moment of intimacy that reminded us of our connection. Each experience helped build a foundation of trust, brick by brick. I learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means acknowledging the hurt, understanding its impact, and deciding to move forward despite it. I had to remind myself that Sarah was not the same person who made that mistake. She was evolving just as I was. Eventually, we celebrated a year since that fateful day of discovery, the day that changed everything. As we reflected on our journey, I realized how far we had come. We had faced our demons, fought through the pain, and emerged stronger together. In the end, I discovered that love is not just about the good times. It's about how two people choose to navigate the storms together. I may have been betrayed, but I also had the opportunity to grow, to learn about resilience, and to reclaim my power. As I look toward the future, I feel hopeful. Whatever lies ahead, I know that I am ready to face it with a renewed sense of self, and I am willing to love with caution but also with a fierce determination to nurture the bond I share with Sarah. We are rebuilding, brick by brick, and I am learning that healing is a journey, not just a destination.